The hidden, true history of the samurai. In the year 792, the Emperor of Japan abolished his own army. Not because the empire was at peace, because the army was failing. The conscript soldiers sent north to fight the Emishi, an indigenous people in the Tohoku region who fought on horseback with ferocity and speed the imperial foot soldiers could not match, were proving worse than useless. They fled, surrendered, and consumed resources without producing results. And so the Son of Heaven, Emperor Kanmu, made a decision that would shape every aspect of Japanese civilization for the next 7 centuries. He dismantled the national military and replaced it with professional warriors hired from the provinces. Nobody called them samurai yet. That word derived from the verb saburao, meaning to serve in close attendance to a lord, would take another century to attach itself to the warrior class that was quietly forming across the Japanese countryside. These men were hired hands at first, armed retainers protecting the rice estates of wealthy provincial landowners who had grown powerful enough to ignore the increasingly irrelevant imperial court in Kyoto. They were paid in koku, units of rice. They trained on horseback. They learned the bow first, not the sword. The earliest samurai were mounted archers, not swordsmen. 2 questions define this moment and echo through the entire 700-year story that follows. What happens when a civilization decides to outsource its violence to a professional class? And what happens when that professional class eventually realizes it is more powerful than the civilization it was hired to protect? The answer to the first question took about 4 centuries to fully materialize. The answer to the second arrived in the year 1185 in a narrow strait between 2 Japanese islands when the greatest naval battle Japan had ever seen decided which family of warriors would govern the country. The imperial court had created the samurai. The samurai were about to return the favor by making the imperial court irrelevant. 2 clans tear Japan apart for 5 years. By the 12th century, 2 warrior families had grown so powerful that the imperial court in Kyoto could no longer function without choosing sides between them. The Taira clan, known by their battle color of red, had risen first. Their patriarch, Taira no Kiyomori, had done what no warrior before him had managed. He married his daughter to an emperor, placed his infant grandson on the throne as Emperor Antoku in 1180, and effectively turned the court into a Taira possession. The Minamoto clan, whose battle color was white, had been crushed in 1160, and their leader's sons sent into exile as children. One of those exiled children was Minamoto no Yoritomo. In 1180, Prince Mochihito issued a secret call to arms against the Taira. The call reached Yoritomo in his place of exile in the Izu Peninsula. He raised an army. The Genpei War, its name combining the alternate readings of the characters for Minamoto and Taira, had begun. It would last 5 years and consume the entire country. The decisive moment came on April the 25th, 1185, in the Straits of Shimonoseki, at a place called Dan no Ura, where the narrow channel of water separating the islands of Honshu and Kyushu changed direction with the tides. The Taira, more experienced sailors, had the advantage in the morning when the current flowed their way. By afternoon, the tide had shifted, and so had the battle. One of the Taira commanders defected mid-engagement, revealing which ship carried the 6-year-old emperor. Minamoto archers targeted the helmsman and rowers of that vessel, sending it out of control. Seeing the battle lost, Taira nobles began throwing themselves into the sea. The emperor's grandmother jumped overboard with a child in her arms. Both drowned. The red and white colors of the opposing clans became Japan's national colors, visible today on the Japanese flag and the banners of sumo tournaments. Minamoto no Yoritomo established his military government at Kamakura, south of modern Tokyo. In 1192, the emperor, now a powerless ceremonial figure, formally granted him the title of shogun. The samurai class had not merely won a war, they had replaced the government. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support, and let's continue. Women of the warrior class pick up the sword. In 1184, during the second year of the Genpei War, a Minamoto commander named Minamoto no Yoshinaka rode into battle with a warrior in his retinue who would become the most celebrated female fighter in Japanese history. Her name was Tomoe Gozen. The medieval war chronicle, known as the Tale of the Heike, describes her as extraordinarily beautiful and as a remarkable archer who could ride unbroken horses down treacherous slopes without losing her seat. More relevantly, it describes her as a warrior who had personally decapitated enemy commanders in the field. Whether Tomoe Gozen was a fully historical figure or a combination of history and legend remains debated. What is not debated is that women of the warrior class received systematic martial training throughout the samurai period. These women were called onna bugeisha, female practitioners of the military arts. Their primary weapon was not the katana, but the naginata, a pole weapon with a curved blade at its end, approximately 2 meters long, designed to compensate for shorter reach and allow effective combat against mounted opponents. The naginata was so closely associated with samurai women that it became a standard item in a noblewoman's dowry. The role was practical, not ceremonial. Samurai men spent extended periods away on campaign. Their wives were expected to defend the household, the castle, and in many cases the entire domain in their absence. The evidence is not merely literary. Forensic analysis of skeletal remains recovered from Japanese battlefields has confirmed the presence of female warriors among the dead. The most politically consequential onna bugeisha was Hojo Masako, wife of the first shogun Minamoto no Yoritomo. After Yoritomo's death in 1199, Masako took Buddhist vows and then proceeded to govern the Kamakura shogunate for the next 2 decades, earning the title the Nun Shogun. She outmaneuvered a retired emperor's attempt to reassert imperial power in 1221, rallying samurai loyalty to her family with a speech that the chronicle recorded in full. Under her governance, the system her husband had built survived its most serious early challenge. The samurai women of Japan were not footnotes. They were load-bearing walls. The Mongol Empire sends its largest fleet to Japan. By 1271, Kublai Khan had conquered most of China, absorbed Korea into his empire, and declared himself emperor of the Yuan dynasty. He sent diplomatic missions to Japan demanding tribute and submission. The response from the Kamakura shogunate's regent, Hojo Tokimune, was to send the 5 Mongol emissaries to Kamakura and have them beheaded. Their graves still exist today at the Temple of Joryuji, near the Tatsunokuchi execution ground in Fujisawa, Kanagawa Prefecture. The first invasion fleet set out from the Korean port of Happo, modern Busan, in autumn of 1274. It carried between 30,000 and 40,000 soldiers aboard 500 to 900 vessels. The Mongols deployed weapons Japan had never encountered. Explosive bombs packed with gunpowder and iron fragments, and massed infantry formations that fought as coordinated units rather than individual warriors. The samurai defenders in northern Kyushu were initially overwhelmed. Then, overnight, a violent storm struck the fleet anchored in Hakata Bay. An estimated 13,000 Mongol soldiers drowned. The surviving ships limped back to Korea. The shogunate spent the next 7 years building a stone wall 20 kilometers long along the coast of Hakata Bay. They organized the samurai defenders of Kyushu into a rapid response system. They prepared. The second invasion, in 1281, was the largest attempted naval invasion in world history until the Allied landing at Normandy in June of 1944. 4,400 vessels, 140,000 soldiers and sailors. On August 14th, 1281, as the Mongol commanders prepared the final coordinated assault to overwhelm the Japanese defenders, a typhoon struck the fleet at anchor in Hakata Bay. Most ships were destroyed within hours. From between half and two-thirds of the invasion force drowned. Those who made it ashore were systematically hunted down and killed by samurai over the following days. These storms were named kamikaze, divine wind. 663 years later, Japanese pilots would take the same name into the skies over the Pacific, believing they too could become a force of nature against an invading fleet. 100 years of civil war consumes everything. The Onin War began in Kyoto in 1467 over a succession dispute within the Ashikaga shogunate. Two factions supporting rival candidates fought each other in the streets of the imperial capital for 10 years, burning the city to a shell. When the war formally ended in 1477, nobody had won. The shogunate's authority had simply ceased to exist as a practical matter. What followed was approximately 130 years of near-continuous civil war across the entire Japanese archipelago, a period called the Sengoku Jidai, the Age of Warring States. The concept that defined the era was called Gekokujo, the lower overthrowing the higher. Men of no particular birth or noble lineage could rise to supreme power if they were ruthless enough, clever enough, and lucky enough. The social order that had structured Japanese life for centuries dissolved in the acid of constant warfare. Hundreds of regional warlords, called daimyo, governed their own territories, maintained their own armies, and settled disputes by force. Alliances lasted only as long as they were convenient. The demand for warriors during this period was insatiable. Armies grew from thousands to tens of thousands. New tactics developed out of necessity. The traditional samurai model of mounted individual warriors performing formal combat on horseback gave way to massive infantry formations of ashigaru, foot soldiers, armed with spears and, increasingly, firearms. Portuguese had arrived in Japan in 1542 carrying arquebuses, and Japanese craftsmen had immediately begun manufacturing their own. By the middle of the 16th century, the country that had produced some of the most refined court culture in the ancient world, poetry, calligraphy, landscape painting, the tea ceremony, was consuming itself. 100 warlords competed over a landscape of burning villages and ruined castles. Only 3 men would eventually have the capacity, ruthlessness, and endurance to end it. And the first of them had been born the son of a minor lord in the province of Owari, in what is now Central Aichi Prefecture, in the year 1534. A peasant's son unites Japan with gunpowder and diplomacy. Oda Nobunaga was not the most powerful daimyo in Japan when the Sengoku period reached its midpoint. He was a mid-tier warlord from Owari province who controlled a fraction of the territory held by more established clans. What separated him from his rivals was a willingness to break every rule of traditional samurai warfare and use whatever method produced results, regardless of whether it was honorable. His most consequential innovation was demonstrated at the Battle of Nagashino on June 29, 1575. The Takeda clan fielded the most feared cavalry force in Japan, warriors bred for generations to charge in devastating mounted formations. Nobunaga positioned 3,000 arquebusiers behind long wooden palisades on the plains of Shitaragahara in Mikawa province. He organized them into 3 rotating lines of 1,000 each, so that while one line fired, a second reloaded and a third prepared. The result was continuous gunfire. When the Takeda cavalry charged, they were met with sustained volleys from 3 separate waves of shooters behind fixed defenses. 10,000 Takeda soldiers died in a matter of hours. The most celebrated cavalry tradition in Japan was destroyed in a single morning. Nobunaga was assassinated at the Honnoji Temple in Kyoto in June of 1582 by his own general, Akechi Mitsuhide. The man who avenged him, and who would complete the unification of Japan, had been born a peasant's son, with no family name and no land. Toyotomi Hideyoshi had started his career carrying Nobunaga's sandals. Within 13 days of the assassination, Hideyoshi had defeated Mitsuhide in battle and positioned himself as Nobunaga's successor. By 1590, he had unified the entire country, the first commoner in Japanese history, to accomplish what emperors, shoguns, and armies had been attempting for a century. Japan had been delivered not by noble blood, but by a man born in a village with no surname. The last great battle decides Japan's fate forever. Toyotomi. Hideyoshi died in 1598 without a capable adult heir. His young son, Hideyori, was 5 years old. He left behind a council of 5 senior regents, sworn to protect the boy's inheritance until he came of age. The most powerful of those regents was Tokugawa Ieyasu. Ieyasu began sending letters to the other daimyo seeking their personal allegiance in violation of the council's collective authority. 2 factions formed. Those loyal to the Toyotomi legacy, concentrated in western Japan and led by Ishida Mitsunari, and those who supported Ieyasu, concentrated in the east. By the autumn of 1600, both sides had concluded that the dispute could only be resolved on a battlefield. On October 21st, 1600, approximately 160,000 samurai gathered on the misty plain of Sekigahara in Mino Province, modern Gifu Prefecture. The fog was so thick in the early morning that the armies could barely see each other. Ieyasu's eastern forces numbered approximately 88,000. Mitsunari's western coalition was comparable in size. The battle appeared evenly matched. What decided it was not tactics, but treachery. Kobayakawa Hideaki, a Western commander who had secretly agreed beforehand to switch sides, attacked his own allies at the critical moment. The Western coalition collapsed within 6 hours. Ishida Mitsunari fled and was captured 3 days later, then executed in Kyoto on November 6th. Ieyasu was formally named shogun by Emperor Goyose in 1603. He moved the capital of Japanese government from Kyoto to Edo, a small fishing village that would grow under Tokugawa administration into the largest city in the world. By 1700, 1 million people lived in Edo. The samurai era entered its longest and most paradoxical phase. 260 years during which the warrior class governed a country that had almost entirely stopped fighting. A nation at peace forgets what its warriors are for. The Tokugawa shogunate built its 260-year peace on a system of surveillance and financial exhaustion, so precisely designed that rebellion became practically impossible. The key mechanism was called Sankin Kotai, alternate attendance. Instituted formally in 1635 by the third shogun, Tokugawa Iemitsu, the system required every daimyo to maintain a full residence in Edo and spend alternating years there and in his home domain. When the daimyo returned home, his wife and eldest son remained in Edo. They were, in everything but name, hostages. The financial burden was calculated and deliberate. A procession of a daimyo traveling to or from Edo could include between 150 and 300 attendants. The cost of maintaining two complete households, one in the home domain, one in the capital, combined with the expense of the annual procession, consumed approximately 25% of a daimyo's annual income. Historians estimate that Sankin-Kotai made armed rebellion economically impractical for most of the period it was in force. The samurai class, with no wars to fight, became administrators. They served as domain officials, tax collectors, judges, and teachers. They studied Confucian classics, practiced calligraphy, composed poetry, and developed the arts of the tea ceremony and flower arranging. The code of bushido, the way of the warrior with its 7 virtues of rectitude, courage, benevolence, respect, honesty, honor, and loyalty, was elaborated and written down precisely in this era, when samurai had the least use for it as a practical battlefield guide. The most famous bushido text, the Hagakure, was composed around 1716 by Yamamoto Tsunetomo, a samurai who had never fought in a battle. Its most quoted line, "The way of the samurai is found in death," was written by a man who died peacefully of old age. The merchants of Edo, growing rich supplying the samurai population, eventually became wealthier than the warrior class they served. The social order was not merely frozen, it was beginning to rot from the inside. 47 men choose honor over their own survival. On April 21st, 1701, inside Edo Castle, a lord named Asano Naganori drew his sword and slashed at a senior court official named Kira Yoshinaka in a corridor of the shogun's palace. Drawing a weapon inside Edo Castle was a capital offense under Tokugawa law, regardless of provocation. Asano was ordered to commit seppuku the same day. He died before sunset. His domain of Akko, in what is now Hyogo Prefecture, was confiscated. His 300 samurai retainers became ronin, warriors without a master, overnight. The shogunate made no move to punish Kira, who had apparently spent months humiliating and abusing Asano over a matter of unpaid bribes connected to court protocol. The disparity of treatment, death for Asano, impunity for Kira, was noted throughout Japan. But under Tokugawa law, vendetta was forbidden without official sanction, and official sanction would never come. The leader of the Akko Ronin was Oishi Yoshio. For nearly 2 years, he lived in the entertainment districts of Kyoto, deliberately conducting himself with such conspicuous dissipation, drinking, visiting pleasure houses, publicly abandoning any samurai bearing, that Kira's spies reported back that no threat existed. In the autumn of 1702, Oishi gathered 46 of his men in Edo. On the night of January 30th, 1703, they attacked Kira's Edo mansion. They killed Kira and 28 of his guards. They marched in the winter darkness to the temple of Sengakuji in what is now the Minato district of Tokyo, and placed Kira's head on the grave of their lord. Then they sent word to the shogunate and waited for arrest. On March 20th, 1703, all 46 men committed seppuku by order of Shogun Tokugawa Tsunayoshi. Their ages ranged from 15 to 77. Their ashes were buried at Sengakuji, beside the grave they had avenged. Every December 14th, a ceremony is held at that temple to commemorate them. The graves are still visited year-round, more than 3 centuries later. The last samurai charge into the age of rifles. When Commodore Matthew Perry of the United States Navy sailed into Edo Bay with 4 steam-powered warships on July 8, 1853, Japan had been closed to foreign contact for over 200 years. The black ships, so called by the Japanese for the smoke that poured from their steam engines, could not be threatened away, could not be sunk by the wooden vessels in Edo Bay, and could not be ignored. Perry demanded that Japan open its ports to American trade. The shogunate, with no answer equal to the question, agreed. The spectacle of a centuries-old military government yielding to a foreign fleet without a fight destroyed the Tokugawa shogunate's legitimacy faster than any internal rebellion could have managed. Within 15 years, samurai from the southern domains of Satsuma and Choshu, those farthest from Tokugawa control and most resentful of Tokugawa authority, organized the military coup that ended the shogunate in 1868 and restored formal power to the young Emperor Mutsuhito. The Meiji Restoration, as it was called, was itself carried out by samurai. Among its leaders was Saigo Takamori of Satsuma, a man of such physical presence, personal courage, and moral authority that he was widely regarded as the ideal of the samurai warrior. The new Meiji government then proceeded to dismantle everything that had made Saigo and men like him what they were. In 1871, the feudal domains were abolished. In 1876, carrying swords in public was banned. Hereditary samurai stipends were converted to government bonds and then phased out. A conscript army of common citizens replaced the warrior class entirely. Saigo withdrew to Kagoshima, the capital of Satsuma in southern Kyushu, and in January of 1877, led a rebellion of 30,000 disaffected samurai against the government he had helped create. The imperial army mobilized 65,000 conscripts, equipped with modern rifles and artillery. The Battle of Shiroyama on September 24, 1877, reduced Saigo's force to 300 men against 30,000. They charged anyway. Saigo was shot and mortally wounded. His surviving companions performed seppuku around him on the hillside. The Meiji government that had just destroyed him declared him a national hero within the decade. It needed the myth of the samurai more than it had needed the samurai themselves.